General Ben Hodges today.
I think it's ludicrous that somebody would think it's not a legitimate target. I mean, just like a factory that makes weapons is a target. So of course, if you've got a large number of Russian troops that are out there in broad daylight that are parading with captured Ukrainian vehicles, they're celebrating whatever they think they accomplished against Ukraine. Of course, that's a target.
He says it's a legitimate military target. Okay, well, let's just look in isolation first of all. So Russia and Ukraine are at war with each other. They strike each other back and forth all the time. Obviously, Russia quite a bit more striking in Ukraine than they do because the Ukraine side doesn't have the capacity to do so. The Ukraine side doesn't have the air defense capacity to defend against the Russian missiles. They have the industrial capacity to make way more than the Ukraine side could ever get. And so that's why we have the disparity here. But in isolation, you would think, okay, if what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And it is perfectly valid to say that the Ukraine side should be able to attack any target inside the Russian. They're at war. So, there's sort of some rules, but then again, maybe there really isn't too. But one of the things is if you fired us, we can fire back. That's kind of a standard deal. But then there's the issue of what you can do and what you should do. Now, if you take some action that's going to have an even stronger counteraction, i.e. that your ending position will be worse than your entry position, then it's obviously foolish to take that action. If you strike your enemy in a way that hurts him, but then his retaliation, which he otherwise has been withholding, is even stronger against you, then why would you want to take some action like that? Unless you had other ulterior motives. So that's the first issue, what you can do and what you should do. Because we're going to have to take a look at what is the likely Russian reaction to this. The next thing he's talking about is the factory, for example. He said, yeah, this is like a factory. You can hit a military factory. Why can't you hit this? Okay, military factories are in fact legitimate targets and have been attacked on both sides of the line. That is a normal part of the war. This is a little different though. So the target itself is an issue that has additional factors that don't exist when you're talking about a factory. And that is the civilian aspect of it. He continues on.
And it's interesting, some of the comments I just read this morning where Medvedev said that, we can't guarantee the safety of Kyiv if the Ukrainians attack our parade. I mean, that's almost comical, as if they could or even would try to guarantee the safety of Kyiv. And then President Putin, I think, said, I hope we don't have to use a nuclear weapon. I mean, this is classic Russian, putting those ideas out there.
Okay, so he's referring to what Medvedev said, where when Zelensky, again, I think a couple of days ago, reiterated his threat to May 9th, then because he said, hey, I can't guarantee anybody's protection. That's what Zelensky said about all the dignitaries that are going to be showing up for this. And he said, I can't guarantee their success or their safety if they go. And so Medvedev fired back in his normally boisterous way and said, well, if you do that, then we can't guarantee the survival of Kiev the next day, implying, well, maybe it's a nuclear weapon, or maybe it's a conventional strike. Maybe it's General Oreshnik who knows. I mean, he wants to create that ambiguity in there. But listen, what Hodges did here is one of the things I've got as a big problem I've had throughout this, with all of these cheerleaders encouraging Ukraine to go on. Yeah, you should go ahead and do that. Who cares if it's comical to suggest that they would withhold firing back at Ukraine, because in Kiev specifically, because listen, if you think that Russia has had this unmitigated or what's the word I'm looking for? If they have had this no holds barred situation from the beginning, then there's nowhere else to go. But if you think that, then you haven't been paying attention, because Russia has expressly not had a no holds barred attack on Ukraine. The attacks, even in recent days, where they have fired into Kiev itself, which had been off limits completely for a long time. You didn't hear any for many months of this war onto Kiev until recently. On those strikes, they were military targets. They were the warehouses, they were storage facilities, etc. There's a lot of issues with apparently, and we saw it. We showed you on this channel how one of the anti-aircraft missiles that the Ukraine side fired either misfired or just simply missed, and then ended up hitting another building inside of Kiev. That appears to be what causes civilian casualties. But some of Russian strikes have also caused civilian casualties. But the target was a military one. What hasn't been a target of the Russian side? You haven't seen their parliament building, the Rada. That has not come under attack. You have not seen their power ministries come under attack. I think once or twice a year or so ago in a relatively limited way. But then that's it. You haven't seen the presidential palace, for example, to my knowledge, has never come under attack. None of those things have been hit at any point. No one has attempted to assassinate Zelensky. They have kept themselves off of that. You go in and you strike something like this, and you could completely change the dynamic. And now then all of a sudden, they may take those holds and take them off. And I assure you, Russia has the capacity to do much, much more on this war inside of Kiev. He continues on.
I think this is where a real war leader would be doing things focused on winning the war, not holding a big, stupid parade like this. Obviously, I guess President Putin feels this is a way to keep the spirits of his own population built up. But if I was advising President Zelensky, I would launch hundreds of drones of all types, and some of them will get through.
Yeah. If it was me, I would be saying, just do whatever you want. Fire up into this crowd. Let's take a look at the targets in here. Like I said, Russians have fired into military targets even in Kiev in recent days. What is the target here? Now, he at one point said, that you have all of these military guys floating around in there. They're in a tight circle, a high-value target by any definition. But if you fire into that, what else is there? There's also a large civilian population. There will be thousands of people in the audience that are going to be watching this thing. It's going to have a global television audience. It's going to have people sitting in the dais right near the front there where Vladimir Putin is, of Xi Jinping, of China, of Lula, of Brazil, of Robert Fico from Slovakia, a Western European country, and quite a few others. I don't remember how many leaders are going to be there. But these are people who will be there. Can you imagine the image if all of a sudden Ukraine fires a missile or a drone or something like that gets in there and it blows up in there and you have it all over the international arena? Everybody sees it. Carnage because this will be broad daylight. Carnage of civilian bodies everywhere. Horrific scenes, scream from the crowd. I mean, that would be as bad as you can possibly imagine. You're not going to hit a clean military target. You're going to have civilians in collateral damage. Now, you can make the argument that that's what war is, and you shouldn't be doing that. Okay, let's say that you're 100% on the Ukraine side and you hate Russia with all of your heart and soul. And then you're saying, yeah, well, they haven't cared about our civilians, so we're going to take care of them. Here's where we get back to where I started at the beginning. What you can do and what you should do. If you do something like this, and that is some of these missiles get through, or the drones, or anything, and you have the kind of carnage that I just talked about, we're going to talk about the leaders separately. But if you just have the human carnage, what do you think people are going to think? That this has nothing to do with the front lines. It has nothing to do with the war that's going on in the Donbass or in the Sumy area, in the Kharkiv area, all that stuff, all the way down to Zaporizhia. That has nothing to do with that war at all, with the fighting, the tactical fighting. This is something way off into the distance. And then now you see all of these civilians, and could be large numbers of them, bloody and carnage. It's going to turn global population against the guy who fired that, because it won't be hard to figure out that this had nothing to do with the war. This had everything to do with you hating Russia. And so now then you've had this carnage where you had this really high profile thing on the civilian people. Many of the Ukraine side will be cheering loudly. Just be honest with it. They wouldn't care. All that thing I just described, a lot of the pro-Ukrainian people, apparently Ben Hodges among them, wouldn't care about that. They would say, fine, good on them. That's what they deserve. They've been doing it to the Russian side, so the Russian side has been doing it to them, so why shouldn't they get some of their own? That's what a lot of people believe. But what would be the reaction? Would that help Ukraine? Would it help them win the war? Would it gain them any sympathy in the world right now? It would do almost certainly the opposite. It would turn people who may be on their side now against them, as they'll say, this is just a pointless escalation. This is something that is not going to help. We don't support this. We want this war to come to an end right now as well. Now, that's with the civilian population. Then you have the leaders. Now, imagine if you think that you're going to take out Vladimir Putin. What if you hit the dais with that and you take out the leader of Russia? Or you miss him and you hit Xi Jinping of China? What do you think if it's Robert Fico or Lula from Brazil or any of these other heads of state? There's quite a few that are coming there. What do you think the result's going to be with them? Are they going to be okay with it? Are they even going to be okay if the dais isn't hit and this other carnage I described is? That you're willing to risk the head of state of China, for crying out loud? I mean, they'll think that you have lost your mind and that you're irrational and can't be trusted. For that reason also, they would turn against Ukraine. There's no good thing about this at all. And to have Ben Hodges, who was a former 3-star general, and is still, as you see, he's put on TV all the time. People keep listening to him. And I'm thinking he actually bragged about it. If I was advising Zelensky, I'd tell him to do hundreds of them, which means that your strategic advice is as flawed and deeply bad as it can be imagined. You would literally be risking the expansion of the war and to help people turn against the side that you claim to be for. Listen to me. Listen carefully here. There is no upside for the Ukraine side to do this. It's not going to gain them any more support. It's not going to make anybody think, oh, the Russians will lose. It's not going to make the Russians quake with fear. What it will do, the most likely course of action, is it will make Russians rage with anger. And right now, and in fact, that reminds me of something that Trump said, I think it was just yesterday, when he was talking about trying to bring an end to this situation. Here's what he said about, now this is what he's going to say right now. This is what exists right now. Watch this.
We've had some good conversations on Russia and Ukraine over the weekend, over the last few days actually, but we've had some very good conversations on Russia and Ukraine. There's a lot of hatred there, I will tell you, between the two parties and between even the generals. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of hatred, but we've had some very good discussions over the last few days.
So he's actively trying to end the war. So Trump says, since he's been in August on the 20th of January, he's been trying to bring this to an end. We've talked at length earlier today in our shows about the difficulty he's having, et cetera, but that's still his objective. He's trying to bring it to an end. He claims that they're getting closer, but that there's this hatred going on. Now you add in a strike here in a parade that has a lot of civilians and other heads of state, and Russians are killed there on global television. You can't even measure the amount of hatred that will have among the Russian people. I told you, they are restraining themselves considerably on the target set that they've had so far. Now, Medvedev is a hothead, and he's just well known for being exaggerating and hyperbole and all this kind of stuff. But it's not wise to think that this is hyperbole, because he won't be the only one to think this. They'll all be thinking this. They'll say, all right, time to take the ropes off. And I promise you, the likelihood for Ukraine is that the target list will expand. And now then all those ministries I told you that have been off limits will be on limits. I bet there would be Oreshniks dropping several of them inside Kiev. And there's no defense against that. We don't even have defense against that. And they cause profound amounts of damage. And that's just even among the regular weapons they could also employ. So that could get more Ukrainians killed. It could get Ukrainian leaders killed. It could be devastating to their power ministries, all the things where their command and control and their headquarters is for the army itself. All those things come under target here. Now, I don't think that even in this situation, unless Putin himself was actually killed. Now, if you took out the Dias, then I think that the likelihood of a nuclear weapon in Kiev that day probably is really high. It's hard for me to imagine how they would not do it. Maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they would still have enough self-restraint. I don't know. But the risk would be just through the roof. So that's number one. But even if they only kept it conventional, there's so much more they could do. And that they could say the gloves have come off all on the front line too. They could now push much more heavily. And we've told you, According to even the Ukrainian intelligence that they publicly say, now this is not anything secret, they say there's about 600,000 Russian troops currently along the 2,000-kilometer total front line here. But there's 700,000 or 800,000 that are still not in contact. Now, just imagine if they said, all right, we're going to add another 300,000 or 400,000, which would be like triple the number that attacked on the opening sequence of the war in February 2022, on top of what's already there. The chances that the Ukraine army would be able to hold that back is just almost non-existent. There's just very little chance they would be able to do that kind of mass, especially at selected weak points in the front. I mean, you could see the whole thing collapse. And I promise you, as the Germans found out in 1945, 80 years ago, if you get a bunch of mad Russians who then are just hell-bent on driving to your capital, nothing is going to stop them. There's no reason to try to find that's going to happen now. The only thing that makes any sense at all and makes tremendous sense for the Ukrainian people is to recognize these incredible dangers. Let all this stuff Zelensky's been saying be hyperbole. Let it just be threats and whatever else. Maybe they'll fire somewhere else. Maybe they'll fire into Sevastopol. Sevastopol has already canceled their May 9th parade. They had one that they had planned on there, and they said, yeah, we're not going to do that. The risk is too great. There's lots of attacks have gone in, even the last few days, into the Crimea, and so wouldn't be a surprise, and the Ukraine side does have the capacity with some of their drones to get through there. So they're not going to have a parade there. But so whatever, if you have to fire somewhere, just fire it somewhere else. And if you just need to do that, don't fire into Moscow on this day, because the cost could be so grave for the Ukraine side. What they should do is say, all right, it's time for reality to come seeping into this, even if it is past the 11th hour. It's time to go ahead and do it, because it can get so much worse. And if Zelensky has any kind of intelligence and wisdom left, the last thing he should do is to listen to any word that General Ben Hodges say. He should reject that advice categorically as nearly suicidal.